to start with the footnote, if you ask people at soup kitchens what they're good at, you know what the dominant answer is? If you ask homeless, what are you good at? Cooking. So why are we cooking for them when that's what they're good at? So as soon as you have something in mind for another, you've colonized them. I don't care what word you use. Call it love, call it charity, call it transformation. So the idea that we're going to transform someone else, I pass. When I wrote a book on empowerment, and everybody wanted to know, how do you empower other people? Well, that question is empire. Framing the question so nothing changes. So I like the notion of how do you invite people into joining you in constructing an alternative future, future distinct from the past. I got from Werner Erhard, beautiful stuff.
That sounds like neighborliness.
It is neighborliness. So that transformation, we also want to go to heaven and don't want to die. So I want transformation. I want a manual, I want a workbook, I want 7 M's, right. The 7 T's of transformation. As if it's something that you, so I like the longing, and it's real, it's heartfelt. But you say, so what is the inversion in your thinking you're willing to participate in? That's what I put over the door. So if you come, if you're interested in a conversation with us about, well, we have to. So Meg Wheatley is a friend. She says, she does a little exercise with me by trying this with groups. Break into groups of 3. And I want you to share with the other 2 people the one belief that you hold most dear to be true. The one thing. And then you have them share that. And they name that. So it's the existence of God, the human spirit is positive in nature. Relationships count. Love is the answer, whatever it is. And then she says, this is the trickster, the coyote. Suppose that wasn't true. Could you please now talk about what that would mean to you? So this is transformation. And is there a life, a future, if everything we held to be sacred wasn't true? Yep. That creates an opening for everything to occur.
Which is a good leadership, not to be specific, but speaking of leadership, recommendations for people in the wilderness of these new narratives that are like, okay, well, what can I do to create space to do this? You talk about like those disorienting questions. Is there that and a couple other things for leaders to consider that are stumbling?
Well, see yourself as a host and convener, as a catalyst, as a creator of context, and then stop colonizing each other. So I know that everybody who wants to be helpful to me has something in mind for me. And I'm happy about that because that's a defense against my own transformation. So if I live out what you have in mind for me, I haven't grown up yet. So every transformative moment always involves an act of betrayal. I have to betray what you had in mind for me, even though what you had in mind of me was graceful. I'm not the son you had in mind. Jesus might have had that thought once or twice also.
That's right.
I'm not the son you had in mind. I'm not the daughter you had in mind. I'm not the husband you had in mind. I'm not the leader you had in mind. So leadership has to get off the notion that followers are customers. Your parishioners are not your customers. You're not here to meet their expectations. You're here to give them give voice to an alternative way of being together. And so that's a big part. That's the stance against invitation is the opposite of neighborliness, is the opposite of colonization. So I'm not interested in what you have in mind for me. I'm not interested in feedback. I'm not even interested in development. I'm not a work in progress. I'm done. Not great. This isn't what I had in mind. But that creates space to create a future together. That creates space for me to get to know people who are poor. And so smart journalists go up to homeless people now and say, what are you good at? And what they discover is they can sing, and they can pray,
And dance.
and they can dance, and they have 1,000 things. And the only difference between homeless people and me is I, for some reason, have a support system that they don't have. And the problem is they call themselves homeless long after they have a house to live in.
You call themselves?
Yes. See, they internalize
Yep.
homeless as
Yep.
who they are.
Yep.
That had market value.
Yeah.
So it has
And
market,
found their story outside the empire
well, they
more
still,
so than we're trying,
Oh, they
struggling
do.
to find ours, and we think we have it.
yeah. So what do you do with poor people find out who they are? What do you do with my favorite bumper sticker is the meek don't want it, you know? You don't hear it. Well, they don't want the world that we've created. So the answer, the alternative to charity is curiosity. Who are you? And the most loving who are you question in the world isn't, don't tell me your story. Because if you told your story more than twice, it's habit. It's manipulation, actually. Let me try to convince you. Tell me what you're good at. What do you know how to do? And John is wonderful with John McKnight. He says, not only tell me what you're good at, tell me what are you willing to teach others. So in that question I got,
It's a little too much commitment there.
well, it's also, it reconstructs my relationship to the other. So I'm interested in the Syrian general. So if you read the papers, he's the enemy we've been waiting for.
That's right. That's right.
What does Pharaoh do without an enemy? What does this country do without an enemy? Because the reality, the fact that we're the more powerful military power in the world means nothing. All it does is justify your predatory economy. So how are we going to... And so the argument always of empire is we're creating jobs.
That's right.
And we're making you safe. And they're false arguments. So these Libyan protocols of commonness, ordinary citizens. What are you good at? What do you know how to do?
Where do you see signs of communities sustainable without
the food
without
movement
enemies?
The food movement, localism. Now it gets made empirical, because now when I go to a restaurant, I got to find out who raised the chicken.
Right.
Chinese.
I don't care. You know, this corn is from Paul Simpson's garden, so that's a commercialization of. But the food movement, local food, community garden movement. So there's 35 community gardens. Detroit and these cities are getting smart and turning what used to be wasted land. So if you go to a zoning hearing, they say, if you don't let me build on this property, you've rendered the land useless. Got it? So now we're finding use. Right. So I want to participate in the moment when we turn Walmart back into undeveloped land.
Right.
So the food movement, you said, the policing movement, there's something called community policing. So now a portion of every city that's got a brain says the purpose of police is to help citizens come together, know each other.
I didn't see that on the news either, so I'll have to check your sources.
Localism, communal movement will never be covered by the New York Times.
That's right.
Because they are empire masquerading as liberalism. And their biggest fear, and I know them really well, is to be accused of being a liberal.
Be accused of
being liberal.
Yeah.
So part of your work, what I would request from the faith community, because you have resources. So John McKnight has been funded from the beginning of his community work mostly by faith-based institutions. So part of what I request of you officially is to create an alternative journalism. Go in the business of telling an alternative story that answers the questions that you're asking, that makes what's going on and makes the plebeian protocol newsworthy.
That's right.
Because right now it's relegated to human interest,
Yep.
and that's not news. So
That's
if
right.
you want to place a human interest story, which the faith community, in the newspaper, they say, would you write it?
Yeah.
We don't have the money or time to write about human interest. We have to write about crime, death, murder, and so the Royal Protocol now celebrates criminality,
Right.
and we're training our children to ease into that world by not letting them lock their lockers in school. So I, as a parent and a father and a grandfather, now have asked the school to solve my drug problem. My kids bringing drugs to school is not my issue. Would you please check their lockers? So journalism is something you got to take seriously.
And
Only you have the
do.
resources. Now, I can give you beacons of journalistic light. So, Yes Magazine, journalism that matters in Vancouver and Seattle, Axiom News in Toronto, the Good News Network in Johannesburg. So there are struggling little places of a different narrative, and they call it generative journalism. So when you're done here, you should drive to Toronto. And Peter Pula,
We're doing the Bourbon Trail.
you're in the right place for that. So I think we have to take it seriously. You have to not only speak about bricks and straw, but who is telling the alternative
That's right.
story.
Which that's like for the faith community, like that's what discipleship is teaching people how to speak journalistic narrative forces, every
That's
citizen.
right. That's right. Yep.
Yeah, and you need to do that, and don't do it as a recruiting device.
Right.
So you don't do journalism, you do public relations. So if I listen, basically you're trying to invite me into Christ. And so most charity, you say, well, what's the point? Well, I want to bring you into the church.
Yeah. Right.
Let's do it right now.
Huh?
Dear God, come down right now! Save Peter! Do it now! How does it feel? Did you feel that?
I kind of liked it. I liked it. So these are the distinctions that you're making. I'm sure
Yep.
this is the word.
Yep. That's right.
What you represent
That
is
is
making
exactly
these
right.
distinctions.
Yep.